On to you, Drew.
Thank you so much. I'm Drew Jones, and I'm going to be talking about preparing for the OSCP without any pen testing experience. So, a little background about me. Um, I am a system administrator working mostly with Windows Active Directory. I also am a freelance penetration tester, having done penetration tests for companies looking to partner with GeoTab and TELUS. I have the OSCP and CRTP certifications, and I'm working on finishing up the OSWE. So I passed the OSCP in August of 2020 on my first attempt. I did it with no previous cybersecurity or IT experience. At the time, I was working as a IT hardware specialist, so not really pertaining to penetration testing or networking at all. And I did it I don't have a university education, and this was my first certificate, so I am 100% self-taught in terms of cybersecurity and penetration testing. So a quick overview of what I will be talking about today is I'm going to be covering the mindset and habits needed for taking the OSCP and preparing for the OSCP, as well as I will be providing some practice resources to help you along your way. I'm also going to be covering some penetration testing tips and tricks as they pertain to the OSCP, so that way you have a better understanding of what difficulties you may encounter. And I'm not going to be talking about a entire pen testing tutorial just because I simply don't have time to do so. So if you're unfamiliar, the OSCP is a penetration testing certificate offered by Offensive Security, and it really tests the fundamentals of penetration testing, such as enumeration, exploitation, privilege escalation, and buffer overflow. When you sign up for the OSCP, you're given a large PDF and a bunch of videos, as well as access to their private PWK Lab environment, and this is considered an industry standard penetration testing certificate. So the OSCP exam is a 24-hour exam for the exploit, and then you're given an additional 24 hours to submit the report after your lab access or after your exam access has been cut. There are a total of 5 targets, and you're going to need 70 points to pass. There's an optional lab write-up for 5 points. So there's a total of 105 points available, and you're not allowed to use any automated exploit tools such as SQL Map, Burp Suite Pro, or Nessus. And however, you are allowed to use one Metasploit module. So I'm going to talk about what you're going to need to do before signing up for the PWK Labs. So what are you going to need to know? Well, you're going to need to know a lot. For example, the tools you're going to need to know is Nmap, GoBuster, Linodum, Nikito, SearchExploit, SMB ClanJohn, Hashcat, Sherlock, Dir, Plink, WFuzz, and a lot more. And that's just the tools. What about the exploits? Well, you're going to need to know LFI and RFI, SQL injections, and a lot more. Stop. All right. That is not a good way of learning the information. You can't just make a list of everything you need to know and study each piece by piece. You're going to have to work on the methodology of penetration testing, so that way you understand how to actually perform a penetration test rather than just knowing, oh, well, I run GoBuster to brute force directories. You will need to know that, but you really are going to have to work on the methodology. So when it comes to working on the methodology and studying for the OSCP, I think it's important to think about the offensive security slogan, try harder. What does try harder mean? It means going the extra mile. You're going to be mentally challenged throughout the OSCP, so you're going to have to work past when you're mentally blocked and go the extra step. In terms of trying harder, you're going to have to learn to Google everything. In my little GIF here, this might be something you would ask someone on Discord or Twitter. How do I enumerate HTTP? Well, Google has that answer, and they actually have answers for just about everything you're going to need to know for the OSCP. And chances are it can provide a more in-depth answer than someone is willing to write out for you. So you're going to have to learn a lot, so you will want to take really good notes. I would recommend using a note-taking tool such as Obsidian or GitHub or GitLab Markdown. And I would recommend using a Markdown editor because you're going to want to include photos and code snippets of any tools you learn or any boxes you root. And you're going to come across really useful websites and links. And so instead of just copying and pasting all of that information, just make a bookmark of it, make a little note being like, here's a really good tutorial for Hydra, and then the link. Instead of copying down all the information, it'll help keep your notes more organized. And I would recommend doing a write-up of every machine that you manage to root. This will help you not only retain the information, but will be a really good reference. I would really recommend doing this for the PWK machines because once you finish the PWK, you're not going to have access to the labs anymore. And there's also no public write-ups. So if you forget how you did one of the machines, you're never going to be able to know again unless you go back and redo it. And then I would recommend having a master list of all the machines you've done for a quick reference. So this is my example of a master list for my notes. This is for HacktheBox. And these were my notes when I was preparing for the OSCP before I signed up for the PWK Labs. So on the left side, I have the name of the box, and then I have the operating system, and then I have if I rooted or if I haven't done the box yet. And then the part I blocked out, because I didn't want to spoil any of the machines, is a one line explaining the exploit and the PrivEsc process. For example, if I rooted a machine with PHP deserialization and kernel exploit, I would just put that information there. And if I ever came across that again, I know I could just reference my write-up for that machine. So the offensive slogan is try harder, but I think it's also to remember to try smarter. Especially when you're new to penetration testing, you're not going to know a lot. And instead of wasting your time on basic concepts for a week, like trying to figure out how to even run an Nmap scan, know your limits and know when to look up a write-up for a machine or a tool, because you can no longer proceed unless you learn something new. So trying smarter pertains to reading write-ups before completing. Some people say that you shouldn't ever do this, but I personally believe there's nothing wrong with it, especially if you're new to penetration testing, because it will be a great way to learn the methodology and new tools. I would recommend making sure that you make notes on what is done, how they do it. If it's a machine walkthrough you're reading or watching, make sure you take notes on each step they do. If it's a tool, make sure you make notes on how they use the tool and what they use the tool for. And I'd also recommend following along with whatever guide you are doing. Do the machine with them, use the tool with them. That'll help you retain it and help you actually understand what they're doing. And while this is helpful, you're not going to want to do this forever because you will be missing out on the actual learning process of how to teaching yourself how to learn. So if you've read or watched a few guides and you feel ready to try practicing out on a target or a machine on your own, this is a strategy I'd recommend trying that I found really useful for me. Is start by trying until you're completely stuck. Say, for example, you're on the enumeration phase and you are trying to enumerate a web port. So you've Googled everything you can related to that web port, and you've used all the tools like Nmap, GoBuster, Nikito, whatever, and you're completely stumped and you've spent countless hours on it. I recommend looking for a hint after that. A lot of places have forums or a Discord you could ask for a hint, and people would be happy to provide it. So that way you can get a little nudge forward instead of looking at the actual solution. If after you've gotten a hint or multiple hints and you're still stuck, look up the solution for only that part. If you're stuck on the enumeration phase, only look up the solution for the enumeration, and don't look up the solution for the privilege escalation as well, because that's just a waste. And then repeat the entire process. Look up the solution for enumeration, then go ahead and try the exploitation until you're completely stuck, then look at the hint, and do this over and over until you've completed the machine. And then after you completed the machine, I'd recommend reading someone else's write-up. You can learn a lot from reading someone else's write-up, even if you've done the entire machine, because someone might explain something that you didn't completely understand, or they might have used a completely different methodology, and it's important to take note of that. So we've all heard the phrase practice makes perfect, and I think the OSCP is a perfect example of practice makes perfect. This is a chart released by Offensive Security. On the x-axis, you can see the number of PWK lab machines compromised, and on the y-axis, you can see the OSCP pass rate. As you can tell, there's a clear correlation between the higher number of machines compromised and the higher pass rate, meaning if you practice more, you're going to have a better shot at passing. So if you're going to practice, you're going to have to use Linux, since majority of the tools you need will be on a Linux machine. I would recommend using Kali Linux or Paired OS, as they have a lot of the tools already installed. If you're completely new, you could try out Kali Linux because it is developed by Offensive Security. So they will provide you with good arsenal of tools needed. And so to practice while trying, you could use the PWK Labs, but the PWK Labs are limited. I think there are around 80 total machines, and they're not super easy to jump into, as well as they can be a little expensive, starting at $1,000 for 30 days. So these are 4 of the most popular alternatives to use. And I want to take a second and look at TJ Knoll and the mayor's Path to OSCP guide. They have TJ Knoll, if you're unaware, is the community manager at Offensive Security, and they comprise this list of machines on the 4 platforms I will talk about that are similar to the OSCP. And I believe there's over 80 machines total here, and they're all very closely related to the OSCP and really help you understand the process and methodology needed. So the first one I would like to discuss is TryHackMe, which is a really amazing platform for beginners. The reason why it's really good for beginners is because they have an introduction to tools and techniques that are used in the hacking process, as well as providing step-by-step tutorials on how to exploit this. They have tutorials on LFI and RFI, on SQL injection, and a bunch more. So if you're struggling with the concept, I'd recommend checking them out. And in addition to that, they do actually have full machines where you have to enumerate, you have to perform your exploit, and you have to perform privilege escalation. So they're definitely a fantastic resource when preparing for the OSCP. CyberSec Labs is honestly, I believe they're a really good resource, even though they're no longer releasing machines. But the machines they do have available are really geared towards beginners. They're really geared towards beginners simply because they don't require heavy enumeration and the exploits are very simple. If you're struggling with HacktheBox or even some TryHackMe machines, I'd recommend checking out CyberSec Labs just because they're, from what I found, the most beginner-oriented types of machines. HacktheBox is my personal favorite. However, they are not geared towards beginners, and they do require a little more experience, as they are a little more complicated in the entire penetration testing process. However, these machines are super OSCP-like, and I would definitely recommend tackling them. If you're unable to do them first, I'd recommend going to them later. And one of the great resources of HacktheBox is a YouTuber named Ipsec, and he does fantastic walkthroughs of every single HacktheBox machine. And I can't stress enough how useful his walkthroughs are and just how good at explaining the entire process he is. The last one is Virtual Hacking Labs, and they actually offer an entire course when you sign up for them. So they offer step-by-step walkthroughs, which can be very helpful to beginners, and they do have their own lab access as well. So if you have done those 4 or 3 or 2, or you feel ready and you're ready to sign up for the PWK Labs, this is my advice on how to actually tackle the entire lab process. So I know you'll want to jump and do the machines they have first, but I would recommend doing the PDF and exercises. It will really teach you a lot and an in-depth for some things. It won't teach you everything, so you can't solely rely on the PDF and videos, but it does really teach you a lot, and it teaches you how to think about certain exploits and enumeration. I'd recommend doing the lab write-up since it is a free 5 points. It will take you a while. It took me about 7 days of really hard work to get it completed, but it's a free 5 points, and you don't want to end up with 65 points and not do the lab write-up, and you'll be kicking yourself for not doing the lab write-up, really. As I said earlier, I recommend doing a write-up for every machine that you root. That way you have a good reference for them, and you can help, it will help immensely with your note-taking process. There are a few Active Directory machines for the PWK Labs, and you shouldn't be afraid of them. I think you should tackle them head on. If you're not good with Windows, do them. If you're good with Windows, they should be easy. So I definitely would recommend looking at the Active Directory machines. And as I've already discussed, use the forums for the hints. They're a good thing, but don't use them. Don't only rely on the forums for every machine you use. This is the PWK Labs provided by Offensive Security. I won't provide any spoilers, but it's really, really well laid out. I learned a ton, and I bet you will too. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about some pen testing tips and tricks that I found when taking the OSCP. These tips and tricks are more pertaining for thinking about the OSCP rather than just general tips and tricks. So the 4 topics for pen testing for the OSCP is enumeration, initial exploitation, privilege escalation for both Windows and Linux, and buffer overflow. Enumeration is by far the most important step of this entire process. You should always be having enumeration running in the background, whether you're running more Nmap scans or you're running enum for Linux for SMB, or GoBuster on every single directory you found. It's important to explore every inch of the machine. And you should be using all the tools that you're allowed to. Just because you think one tool won't give you more information than the other, if you're stuck, run both. Maybe it will give you more information. And you're going to want to be aware of rabbit holes. If you're unfamiliar, a rabbit hole is going down a path that you think is exploitable, but it is not. And this really wastes a lot of time and brain power, especially when you're in a 24-hour time restraint like you are when you're taking the OSCP. So you should really know how to identify a rabbit hole because you will see them on the exam. So this is a quick example from a recently retired machine on HacktheBox, where the enumeration wasn't as simple as you may think. You had to run a GoBuster scan on an already found directory, and that will lead you to another directory where the exploit actually is. A lot of people don't run recursive GoBuster scans, and this is what I mean when you should always explore every inch of the machine, because you never know where the exploit will actually be. And if you're curious, you can read the full write-up on my website. So after you finish the enumeration process, you're going to need to perform the initial exploit. And I really can't stress how important enumeration is. If you've already enumerated well, you should know the exact exploit process you're going to have to take. So you're going to want to look for the version of services that are running, whether it's looking through the source code, using Netcat, or using other tools like Nmap. You're going to want to find the service version running, and then you're going to want to see if it's vulnerable. Looking for it on ExploitDB, GitHub, using Searchpoint or blogs. There's a lot of ways you can look it up, and you should just be Googling the service, the version, and then see if it's vulnerable. Sometimes the exploit won't always be right in front of you, and you will have to string information together. For example, if you find, say, credentials on the HTTP port and you test them and they don't log you into the website there, test them out on SSH, test them out on SMB. String together multiple exploits, if needed even, to perform the initial exploitation and land a reverse shell. So you're going to need to know the most common web exploits, such as SQL injections, directory traversals, LFI, RFIs. You're going to have to know how each of these exploits work and how they will lead you to remote code execution. I'd also highly recommend getting familiar with reverse shells, and I'd recommend getting familiar with a lot of different ones, such as Pentest Monkey or Payload All the Things, Nishing, or MSF Venom. These are all great, and you should know each one of these very well. And then to help you before the OSCP and to help you really understand how the exploit works, I'd recommend testing different scripts. If you find a script that works, try changing it around. Look at how the payload they use and maybe try and change it. If they're using a bash payload, change it to like a PHP or something and see if you can get that to work. Figure out why it will work or why it won't. So after you've performed your initial exploit, you're going to have to perform privilege escalation for majority of the machines. If you're unfamiliar, privilege escalation is elevating from an unprivileged user to a privileged user, such as the root or administrator or NT authority user. So the enumeration process will really be starting all over. You may be able to use a little information from your initial scans, but really it's going to start all over and you're going to need to rerun scripts, test for known weaknesses, checking for kernel exploits. Really your enumeration is going to start completely over and you're going to have to really enumerate the target like you've never seen it before because most of your previous information is irrelevant at this point. Scripts are super important when it comes to privilege escalation for the OSCP. So you're going to want to know multiple scripts for both Linux and Windows and know how to read their output. And if you know how to read their output and you see something that looks weird, just Google it. See a weird SUID, Google that SUID and see if there's a reason it's set like that and if you can exploit it or if there's a weird service running or if there's a cron job, Google it and see what you can do with it. And a lot of people are nervous of Windows privilege escalation, especially when they first start off. And honestly, it's a lot easier than you think. I know you will be using Linux, so you're more familiar with Linux, but Windows is actually a simpler process than Linux. And if you just practice, you'll have it down very well. So you're going to see buffer overflow on the OSCP, and you know you'll see buffer overflow. The other machines could be anything. They could be Windows, they could be Linux, they could be web exports. They could really be anything. But you know there will be buffer overflow, and this should be free points to be completely honest. I would highly recommend knowing how to use Immunity Debugger well, as a lot of tutorials use Immunity Debugger for the buffer overflow process. And this process should be really ingrained in your head. It's really the same steps every time. For me, I personally wrote it out in 8 steps, but I know other people who did 6 to 10. And it really should take you only 30 to 45 minutes to complete a buffer overflow in terms of how the OSCP takes it. And there are a ton of great guides out there. Each one will teach you in different ways. So I'd recommend checking them out if you are struggling or you just straight up don't understand buffer overflow. So I know this was a lot and it can be daunting, especially if you think you're going to be tackling it on your own, but there's actually a fantastic community behind there's actually a fantastic community for people taking the OSCP and people who are done with the OSCP. There's a lot of Discords out there that discuss the OSCP. There's an official one from Offensive Security. However, it's not super active, so I'd actually recommend checking out the InfoSec Discord. They have discussions about every single offensive security certificate, especially the OSCP, and there's always people discussing every day about the exercises, about machines, getting hints, and all of that. So I would really recommend checking that out. If you're not signed up for the PWK yet, you could also check out like HacktheBox and try Hack Me. check out their Discords because they have discussions there about all the machines, and people would always be willing to provide hints or help you with a solution if you're struggling. And there's a bunch of small communities that you'll discover out there who are probably within your skill set and would love to run through machines with you. When you sign up for the PWK, you get access to their forums. I would highly recommend checking them out just because they're super useful and people are always discussing there as well. A lot of people on Twitter are also taking the OSCP, so you can look around Twitter, talk to people on there, and I'm sure you can make a lot of great contacts through that. And you can always reach out to me for if you have any questions pertaining to the OSCP, and I'd be happy to answer them for you. So if you finished the PWK Labs and you feel ready, these are my exam tips for when you're actually in the OSCP. And like always, you're going to want to keep really good notes while you're in the exam. I'd recommend using Cherry Tree or Obsidian, as these are really good note-taking tools. And honestly, by the time you finish the OSCP exam, your write-up should be pretty much done because you've taken such good notes of each process. After the Nmap scan, screen cap the Nmap scan, put it there. You run GoBuster, put GoBuster there. You find the initial exploit, put the initial exploit there. Really, all you should need to do is just write up a little bit of what you did each time, and you should be done. You're going to want to enumerate very, very well for the OSCP, and you're going to want to make sure if you're stuck, just enumerate more. I would recommend starting with buffer overflow because it's a free-ish 25 points. It should be easy enough. If you do the lab write-up and you're very good at buffer overflow, you could easily have 30 points within the first 30 minutes of the OSCP. If you come across a machine that you believe a Metasploit module can exploit, I'd recommend just using it instead of spending several hours trying to do it manually and failing. If you have a Metasploit module available, just use it, especially if you're confident in doing so. That way you waste less time on the exam. And obviously you're going to want to take breaks and not over caffeinate. It is a 24-hour exam. If you over caffeinate, you'll burn out at a certain point. So definitely make sure you know your caffeine limits. And also make sure you back up your machine or any notes you take in case your VM breaks. You don't want to be finishing up your exam and your VM to break, and then you will have nothing left and have to redo the exam. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'm constantly checking my Twitter, but I will also check my email. Thank you.
Awesome. We've had a few questions come in, quite a few actually. The OSCP is apparently an interesting subject in InfoSec. Who would have thought? No, this is sarcasm, of course. On to the questions, if I can find them. There we go, I have them. Okay, so for someone who is self-taught, at what level would you rate the OSCP exam?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I quite understand what level, like, of difficulty?
Yeah,
Yes.
is it something that is extremely hard? Is it something that is medium but is attainable if you put in the work?
It's definitely obtainable. Like I said, I didn't have any experience and I passed on my first time. You're just going to have to put in all the work. I did all HacktheBox, Try Hack Me, CyberSec, and about 50 PWK labs. So you're just going to have to practice.
Alrighty, awesome. That actually covers another question as well. So do you have any specific boxes on HacktheBox that you'd recommend?
Yeah, there's that huge list from TJ Knoll. You can find it. It's everywhere. You could just Google TJ Knoll OSCP list for HacktheBox. Sorry, it's really far back. And it's honestly really well done. I did all Try Hack Me, CyberSec Lab, and HacktheBox, and I can tell you each one is very similar to what you'll see for PWK Labs or OSCP.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Okay. And what do you think was harder, the write-up or the boxes?
The boxes for sure. Like I said, I did a write-up for every single one of the machines I rooted. So I had like, I don't know, almost probably over 100 write-ups. So I was just once I got the write-ups, I could just bang it out super quick, just because I knew what I needed to screen cap, how to organize my notes correctly, especially in a short period of time. So that's why another reason why I'd recommend doing write-ups of every machine you root.
Okay.
We also, right, it's a question about pacing. So you answered it quite well, starting, yeah, okay, don't over caffeinate. So do you use a full 24 hours to do the OSCP exam, or do you like take a break in the middle, multiple breaks? How did you do it?
Personally,
Yeah.
I over caffeinated, which is why I added that bit. I did like 4 machines in like 6.5 hours. And then I was like, sweet, I got my passing points. I'm feeling pretty good. I took like a 30 to 45 minute break. And then I went back to it and I noticed my productivity level just like crash because I drank all that caffeine. It was wearing off. So I tried to recaffeinate, didn't work, try to have a nap, couldn't even nap because I was so over caffeinated. So don't do what I did. If you don't get lucky and you don't finish those machines quickly, you'll crash. So consider it like work. Take a break every hour and a half, every 2 hours. You're gonna have to see what works best for you.
Alrighty. It looks like you covered all the questions with other questions as well, because we had write-up tips and if you pass the OSCP on your first try, but I believe you already covered those, so awesome sauce.
Okay.
Let me make sure we didn't miss any other questions. Yeah, no, we're good.
Good.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. We really appreciate having you here. It was so wonderful to hear you talk about your OSCP journey, and thank you for the suggestions.
Thank you. Thank you for hosting.
Yeah, of course.